Hi everyone, I am here with our Bible study. I hope you guys are having a good night, good evening. I am early. It is only 4:10 p.m. Yes, we are going to practice our verses tonight, like I told you guys. And probably hard for me too, because we ain't went over them in a while, so hopefully I'll know what I'm talking about as well. Hopefully I'll get them all right here. Still got to color that one in, make it look pretty. But we'll do those at the end. We're close to it. Let's put this over here. Okay, so today's Bible study is in the book of Luke. Luke chapter 23. And it is a little bit longer. In Luke chapter 23, we'll be talking about the crucifixion of Jesus, Jesus' death, and Jesus' burial. The resurrection isn't until chapter 24. We won't be getting into that. The devotion tonight is by Cynthia Ruccetti, which you know we have heard from her many times. And the Bible verse that goes along with her devotion tonight is Luke chapter 23, verse 5, which says, "Then they, the religious council, became insistent, but he is causing riots by his teaching wherever he goes, all over Judea, from Galilee to Jerusalem," trying to stir up the people, to get them in a riot, to get them to, they want to kill Jesus, like they always have, even before he was born. You know, King Herod sought to find him and kill him before he was even born. So let's put the devotion aside for now. Let's go read Luke chapter 23. I have trouble keeping my place. I always have had trouble doing that. Alright. I'll be reading in the New International Version for our Bible study. Then the whole assembly rose and led him off to Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, "We have found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar and claims to be Christ, a king." He did not ever say, "Oppose taxes to Caesar," and you know that. What did Jesus say when they showed him that coin? He said, "Whose picture and inscription is this?" And they said, "Caesar's." And he said, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." So Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Yes, it is as you say," Jesus replied. Then Pilate announced to the chief priests and the crowd, "I find no basis for a charge against this man." But they insisted, "He stirs up the people all over Judea by his teaching. He started in Galilee, and he has come all the way here." When hearing this, Pilate asked if the man was a Galilean. When he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. Just like me yesterday, when I called, and just like you, when you call somebody like me, when I called the IRS yesterday and they sent me to Social Security, and Social Security wanted me to call IRS, when you try to get a hold of somebody and they just keep telling you to go to somebody else, keep sending you to somebody else so they don't have to deal with you, you know what I mean? Call this person, I don't know. No, we don't take care of that. You gotta call them. Just want to pawn you off on somebody else. That's what it was like. Pilate sent him to Herod. Herod sent him to Pilate. When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased, because for a long time he had been wanting to see him. From what he had what he had heard about him, he hoped to see him perform some miracle. He plied him with many questions, but Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and the teachers of the law were standing there, vehemently accusing him. Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him, dressing him in an elegant robe, which was probably purple because that was, one of the colors of royalty. They dressed him in an elegant robe and they sent him back to Pilate. That day, Herod and Pilate became friends. Before this, they had been enemies. Pilate called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was inciting the people to rebellion. I have examined him in your presence and have found no basis for your charges against him. Neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us, as you can see. He has done nothing to deserve death. Therefore, I will punish him and then release him." With one voice they cried out, "Away with this man! Release Barabbas to us!" Barabbas had been thrown into prison for an insurrection in the city and for murder. Wanting to release Jesus, Pilate appealed to them again, but they kept shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" For the third time he spoke to them. "Why? What crime has this man committed? I have found in him no grounds for the death penalty. Therefore I will have him punished and then release him." But with loud shouts they insistently demanded that he be crucified, and their shouts prevailed. So Pilate decided to grant their demand. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, because that was the custom to release a prisoner at that time of the year, and they wanted the murderer released instead of Jesus, the one they asked for, and surrendered Jesus to their will to be killed. As they led him away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. For Jesus at this point was too weak from being beat and everything. A large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him. Jesus turned and said to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children. For the time will come when you will say, 'Blessed are the barren women, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if men do these things when the trees is green, what will happen when it is dry?" 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with them to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, Golgotha, there they crucified him along with the criminals, one on his right and the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is Christ of God, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was a written notice above him which read, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God," he said, "since you are under the same sentence? We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus answered him, "I tell you the truth. Today you will be with me in paradise." It was now about the 6th hour, and darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour, for the sun stopped shining, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." When he had said this, he breathed his last. The centurion, seeing what had happened, praised God and said, "Surely this was a righteous man." When all the people who had gathered to witness this sight saw what took place, they beat their breasts and went away. But all those who knew him, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance watching these things. Now there was a man named Joseph, a member of the council, a good and upright man, who had not consented to their decision and action. He came from the Judean town of Arimathea, and he was waiting for the kingdom of God. Going to Pilate, he asked for Jesus' body. Then he took it down, wrapped it in linen cloth, and placed it in a tomb cut in the rock, one in which no one had yet been laid. It was preparation day, and the Sabbath was about to begin. The women who had come with Jesus from Galilee followed Joseph and saw the tomb and how his body was laid in it. Then they went home and prepared spices and perfumes, but they rested on the Sabbath in obedience to the commandment. And that was Luke chapter 23. That is sad, but chapter 24, things get better with the resurrection. If you want to continue on with reading that, it's much, much better. For Jesus comes back to life. All right. So let's read what Cynthia Ruccetti has to say tonight. She says, "Words matter. To the author and to readers, finding the exact word is a writer's constant quest. Jesus was brought before Pilate. The council, jealous, angry, and afraid of losing its standing, tried fiercely to persuade Pilate, insisting that Jesus was dangerous, that his ministry should be stopped, at the cost of his life if necessary. The Bible tells us they became so desperate, they chose a word they knew Pilate would react to: riot. Jesus had, in their words, been causing riots everywhere. Is that what he'd been doing? He certainly drew crowds. Most in those crowds returned home healed, amazed, faith-filled, or wanting to hear more. He caused a lot of wonder and soul-searching. He pricked a lot of consciences, but he rarely raised his voice. It was the doubters, the stubborn, and the ramble-rousers who caused the riots. Those who refused to believe fueled fires of controversy. Jesus, the rebel, whose resistance was against the enemies of God and soul, condemning sin. Jesus, the healer, shepherd, king, the one who welcomed children onto his lap and restored the slashed ear of one of his captors, hours before he was accused of causing riots. I wonder how many of those desperate council members were transformed by Christ's death and resurrection. How many later longed to reward their complaints against him, saying, "He caused a riot in my soul, and I'll never be the same again." I wonder that too. And Cynthia's faith step for tonight, or homework: what one word describes the riot Jesus caused in your life? Redeemed, restored, alive, hopeful, live it. All right. Now I got a animal devotion for you guys tonight too. one is by Deb Kastner. It is called Useless Controversies. And the Bible verse that goes along with it is Titus chapter 3, verse 9, which says, "But avoid foolish controversies and genealogies and arguments and quarrels about the law, because these are unprofitable and useless." Recently, a particularly funny video of a couple of gobby fish surfaced on social media. The gobbies were each accepting to dig their burrows in the sand. Might be the goby, I don't know. However, they apparently didn't like that their neighbor was building so close to them, so they started a fight, taking turns spitting sand at one another. They were so busy arguing among themselves, they didn't realize that every time their neighbor spit dirt at them, the holes were digging inadvertently. While they were digging, their burrows weren't getting any deeper. There have been times in my life when I have behaved just like these silly gobies. While I ought to be focusing on building my own faith in God, I get caught up in silly quarrels or arguments, slinging proverbial dirt on other people, maybe not in person, but at least in my mind. Pride and jealousy, or coveting what others have, can sometimes fill my burrows up as quickly as I'm digging it out, wasting precious time I could be spending with the Lord and with loved ones. So true. It's so true, isn't it? We can get very jealous of stuff someone has or what someone else is doing. Someone in our family or a friend, a neighbor. Maybe they got a new car, a new house, a new outfit, whatever, you know. They got the job and you didn't. So easy to be so jealous when we're supposed to be happy for them instead of being jealous. We should be happy for them instead. That's what you need to learn to do. Be happy for somebody instead of being jealous. That's what God wants us to do. Don't be jealous of that person. Be happy for them. Because that's what you'd want them to be for you. You wouldn't want them to be jealous and be jealous of you and be like, you know, they shouldn't have that. You know, I should have that. Because when you're jealous of somebody, you're kind of angry at them at the same time, you know. Because you're like, you know, they shouldn't have that. You know, I wished I had that. And you should be happy for them, you know. That's really nice. I'm glad they have that. You could always wish you had that too. It'd be nice that they have it. Because, you know, they have it for a reason. They have it for a reason. Everything happens for a reason. Whether good or bad, it happens for a reason. So let's put that aside. Our next Bible study, by the way, will be in the book of Psalms, Psalm 116. So I'll get that set up here in a little bit. Let's go ahead and go over our verses, and then I'll read a hospice story. Okay, so let's see if we can get these. There's 5 verses now. 5 or 6. That's 6 now. 6 verses. Let's do the shortest one first. Proverbs 17:17. A friend loves at all times. Remember that one? God. Okay. Hebrews 13:8. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Got that? You remember that one? Okay. Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Got that one? 3. Let's see, what was the other one that was on the page? John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that so whoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Okay, and Hebrews 13:14. For this world is not our permanent home. We are looking forward to a home yet to come. And last but not least, our new one that we just added, Psalm 139, verse 14, which says, I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. Did I get that right? Yes. Did you guys get them all right? I hope you did, and I hope you're still practicing. 6 verses this year so far. 6. And it's July, and we've memorized 6 verses. It's good to memorize 1 verse in a year. We've memorized 6. You should be very, very proud of yourselves. I'm very proud of you. All right, let me read, last but not least, a hospice story for you. And this one is by Nikki Fox Nash. She was the hospice nurse for Douglas. This is Douglas's story. His little hands reached up and tried to open the lid of the casket. This one is probably going to get me, and I hope it doesn't. Just the sound of it. It has been 19 years since my brother Douglas died. For many years, I have tried to write about what it was like to be a sister losing her little brother and an aunt watching her small nephews experience the death of their dad at the time Douglas was 35, going through a divorce, and the father of 3 young boys. Kevin, the oldest, was 10, and the twins, Christopher and Derek, were 8. His illness began as the flu. Our dad called the doctor when Douglas could not get his fever to go down after a few weeks of self-medicating. The doctor gave Douglas antibiotics, but when he did not respond after 4 weeks, the doctor admitted him to the hospital, where they discovered he had lymphoma. This disease strikes all ages, men and women alike, and at times can be treated successfully. At other times, the disease can be swift and unrelenting. The prayers of our families, friends, and church groups were non-stop. We literally stormed heaven with petitions for a cure for Douglas. The situation was all in God's hands, and his thoughts about healing were different from ours. God blessed me with many wonderful people in my life during this time. My dad, my husband, Dennis, my brother David, and close friends from St. Peter's. 2 of my dearest church friends, Pat and David Osteen, were a godsend. David and Douglas became fast friends, which is often the way God lets things happen for his own purposes, and often not understood by us at the time. David could identify with Douglas. He himself had gone through a lengthy battle with cancer. He was also a great support to my dad and to Kevin. He spent his lunch hours visiting Douglas, and together they shared their love for Christ and their families. That summer, Dad became the main caregiver for both Douglas and Kevin. While the twins stayed with their mother during those 7 months, from diagnosis until his death, many things happened all at the same time. Douglas was in the middle of a divorce, all the while going in and out of the hospital. The children attended vacation Bible school, then started a new school year, then celebrated Thanksgiving and Christmas, while snow covered Jacksonville, Florida for 3 whole days. Douglas died on January 3rd, followed by his viewing and funeral, and then the time to say a final goodbye. God's grace alone carried us through this period of time that seemed to vanish before our eyes. If I had known That would be the last Thanksgiving we would have with Douglas. I would not have gone away for the holiday, or at least not stayed away so long. I believed there would be another Thanksgiving. The doctor had said that Douglas was in remission, and there was no sign of cancer everywhere. They always say that, but I don't care what they say, it always comes back. It always has with my family. My brother was supposed to be getting better. He was even looking and feeling much better, but that was not to be. Douglas became very sick a few days after Thanksgiving and went back into the hospital. He was able to come home for Christmas and spend a little time with the boys, but not for long. A few days before the new year, he called me at work and said, "Nikki, Dad has taken me back to the hospital. I don't want to go. If I go, I know I won't ever leave there again." His words pierced my heart, so I deeply thought that it would break my heart. By the time I got to the hospital with Douglas's oldest son, Kevin, my brother was on a respirator and attached to every kind of pump, IV, and tubing I could imagine. We were praying so hard for a miracle. Douglas, after all, was a young man with 3 wonderful sons whom he loved so much. Surely God did not plan to take him to heaven at 35. We always pray that God's will be done, but in times like these, you just beg him to see it your way. Douglas went into a coma on New Year's Eve, and the next day the doctors told us that Douglas's body was shutting down and there was nothing more he could do. It was a heartbreaking moment for everyone. The little boys would no longer have a father. The sister and brother would no longer have their little brother to tease anymore. And the dad, whose young, energetic son would go to heaven before him. Little Christopher's plea, "I just want to hold Daddy," was not to be. Christopher had a cold, and in those days, children were not allowed near a very sick person. In today's world of hospice care, we were much more enlightened. I wonder if anyone explained to Christopher that you do not need to be physically present with someone as they die. Everyone they have ever loved, who has ever loved them, is present to the dying person as they die. The physical present is not as important as the love they share, which has boundaries and makes itself known in ways understood only by God. But for an 8-year-old, no reason or explanation could possibly comfort his heart. He just wanted to hold Daddy one more time. My dad's hand shook so hard when he signed the form to have the respirator turned off. I could not even begin to imagine the courage and love it took to be able to do this. He placed Douglas's hands in his and began to cry, then sobbed deeply as he crumpled to his knees at the side of Douglas's bed. He stayed that way for a long time, and nobody moved. Douglas died 35 minutes later. It was the first time I had ever seen my dad cry. God the Father giving up his Son, Jesus, must have felt something like this. He knew it was necessary to save a hurting world, but the pain to God the Father's own heart had to be somehow like my dad's pain in letting Douglas go. When God the Father came to this earth through his Son, he fully shared the humanity we all know so well. Jesus had a divine and human nature. Every emotion we will ever experience, Jesus understands perfectly. The morning of the funeral service was a blur. I remember watching the children as they sat by Douglas's casket in the front pew. When the service began, they closed the casket for the last time. For a moment, I thought of life for my brother David and me without Douglas, and my dad without his son. Then my mind went immediately to Douglas's children and what life without him would mean to them for years to come. When the service was over and it was time for the family